She remembers being taken into like a lodge type setting, like a moose lodge or an elk's lodge or something like that. And that the men were wearing masks, different types of masks and animal masks. They wanted her to renounce God, to say that God wasn't real, God didn't exist. And she had to say that God wasn't real and God wasn't going to help her. And she had to repeat this over and over again. She said that she was forced to defecate on a Bible, urinate on a Bible. Okay. My godfather, shortly after I was born, apparently gave me the gift of a baby bunny rabbit, a white baby bunny named Chimo. And we grew up together, me and Chimo. I remember being in a cage with Chimo in the basement on the floor. I had no clothes on, and the only comfort I had was that rabbit. Hugging that rabbit, curled up, sleeping with that rabbit on the floor. And just the comfort of his fur, the comfort of his warmth. And I was about 4 or 5 years old. We had babysitters come in. These babysitters were teenagers. I don't know where my parents were. I don't know where any adults were. But these babysitters were vicious. They were abusive as well to both my brother and I, the times that they had babysat in the past. Well, this particular night I'm wearing a nightie. They had thrown me down on the floor and pulled my nightie up over my face. And then they put the rabbit down on my chest and they pulled the nightie back down so I could see what they were doing. They said, give him one more hug, say goodbye to Chimo. And they lifted up Chimo and they slashed him open. And all of his insides fell out on top of me. And they said, don't tell anybody about this. Cross your heart, hope to die, stick a needle in your eye if you tell anybody. And I said, I won't tell anyone, I won't tell anyone. And they had the knife that they cut him with, and they cut my chest. They put a cross on my chest with the knife. I still have the scar on my chest to this day from where they did that, and they said that they would do to me what they did to Chimo if I ever told anybody about what had happened. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, was born in Manitoba, in Winnipeg. My journey has been a confusing one, a crazy one that most people would not want to believe is real. My family is riddled and has been ripped apart by these issues. And so it hits very close to home. Has affected both my parents, their siblings, my cousins, my brother, myself. And because of the amount of trauma that I've been through and trying to overcome, it's also affected my children.
You talked some about what it was like growing up in your house, and you talked about the time that you were forced to be in your room by yourself with no water, with no food. Okay, can you share a little bit about that?
And I remember being older, 3, 4 years old, and I'd be in my room forever. It just felt like forever, and I didn't know if anybody was going to come and let me out of that bedroom. My brother was in his own room by that time, and his room was in the basement. Mine was upstairs. We'd be allowed out maybe around lunchtime, just before lunchtime, around 11 in the morning, to watch TV for an hour, to eat lunch, and then I'd be put back in my bedroom. And I remember calling out one time, I said, "Mom, can I come out now? Mom, can I come out now?" She came to the door and she says, "You will be let out when I say you can come out. Don't ask me again. If you ask again, I'm going to hurt you." She came in my face. She put her hand to my throat and she says, "I hate you. I wish you were never born. I don't want to look at you. I don't want to smell you. I don't want you in my face. I don't want to hear you. You just stay in your room and stay put until I say you can come out and I'm ready to tolerate your face." And she left the room. You don't dare move when you've been told that. And this second house here was the house I grew up in, 224. This bedroom on the end, that was my bedroom. And the one next to it was my brother's bed. I would have been about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. The phone rings and it was around lunchtime. So it would have been a point of the day when I was out of my room that the phone rang. My mom answered the phone and I was right beside her. I wanted to know who was on the phone. I was hoping company might be coming over. It was always nicer when company was over. A lot of the time we could actually interact with whoever was over, at least be out of our room. So I was excited to see who was on the phone. Well, my mom drops the phone. She doesn't hang it up. She dropped the phone. Started off a normal enough conversation, but then she just sort of blanked and dropped the phone. I'm leaning against this door that was across from the phone, and that door led into the basement. There was no knob on the door, but there was a latch. And she undid the latch and gave me a push, and I went through the door and went backwards down a set of wooden steps to the basement, banged my head on the concrete at the bottom, and I know I was laying on my leg out of its socket behind me. So I was injured pretty good. And remember my mom yelling, coming down the stairs, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I found that weird. Why would I be okay after her shoving me? She thought my back was broken and she was freaking out, ran upstairs. I don't know who she phoned, okay? I know I was in and out of consciousness and just in pain and confused by what had happened. Next thing I know, I'm being put on a backboard and they're trying to be really careful. The EMS team, I guess. But when I came to, I wasn't in a normal place. I was in a hallway of some sort, and it didn't seem like a hospital. In hindsight, it didn't seem like a hospital at all. It was just this strange hallway. I tried to sit up in this crib that I was in, and it was a metal crib. And I grabbed onto the rails and tried to pull myself up, and it was sharp. It was digging into my hands. And so they're pushing down on me at the same time. So as soon as I tried to push up, they're shoving me down and saying, "Kimmy, don't move. You can't move. You have to hold really, really still." There are 4 or 5 people standing around the crib and holding my legs down and holding my shoulders down. And I felt this poking, just these sharp pokes going into my scalp. And it felt like needles going in, and they were taping them down. So there's like wires or something coming out of my head. Makes sense in hindsight, because if I banged my head, they're probably checking for concussion, checking for brain waves or whatever. So when I first started getting this memory back, to me that seemed normal enough. Well, the next phase of memory comes back, and the side of the crib is lowered, the side bars are lowered, and they're carrying me out of the crib, and they put me in a metal tub filled with ice water. And it was just absolutely shocking to my body. I know I was wearing something. I had underwear on and like a tank top or a tank t-shirt of some kind. They submerged me in this ice water, and I'm screaming and yelling and trying to get away from what they were doing, but I couldn't get away from them. They take me out of the ice water and put me in another tub that was full of really hot water. And so the shock to my system again with the heat was just intense, and I'm screaming and yelling and trying to get away. They moved me from that tank back into the ice water, and they went back and forth like this between shocking cold and shocking hot. And my body was just screaming. I was screaming and yelling for it to stop and trying to pull away, but they had control of my limbs. Finally, I couldn't fight anymore. I just gave up fighting. There was no point. I lost the will to fight. I don't even know how to explain what happens. You just go limp. You just lose your will after a while because you have no choice. They're going to do to you what they're going to do to you, and you just give up. It's like, I guess, when you're breaking a horse or you're breaking an animal in to be domesticated. It felt like they were taking me from wild animal into just limp ragdoll. So once I went limp and stopped fighting, then I'm put into this dark tank of water and settled down into it. I remember tears were coming out of my eyes, tears rolling down the side of my face. And I know the water they put me in was body temperature. It wasn't hot or cold. It was just this nice middle temperature and relaxing. It was salt water. I remember it being salty and very dark. Really, really dark. And I drifted. I just felt like my spirit or my mind was drifting. And it started to get lighter. I don't know how to explain that. I'm in this dark, dark place, but in my mind or in my spirit, I start to lift, and then I'm in this white sort of realm.
On leur vend, en quelque sorte, une culture de l'accession à un nouveau niveau de conscience par la mortification de la chair. Il est question, pour libérer l'esprit, d'éteindre le corps. Pour éteindre le corps sans mourir, on va le saturer de sensations, de plaisir et de douleur, jusqu'à ce que les capteurs sensoriels disjonctent. Et alors là, quand vos capteurs sensoriels disjonctent, c'est le nirvana, c'est l'ascension spirituelle.
Nous disposons uniquement d'informations fragmentaires, mais nous avons une certitude.
My mom has multiple personality disorder. When she was diagnosed with this, I was in my early 20s. And I had separated from her for a period of time. I told her that I didn't want anything more to do with her until she got professional help. I knew that she was mentally disturbed because of years and years and years of abuse I'd gone through. I thought she maybe had schizophrenia or some sort of disorder along those lines. It was months later, after no contact with her, she called me one day and said, "Kim, I want to go for lunch with you. I need to tell you what's going on." She says, "Let's meet somewhere in public where it won't turn into a scream fest. There'll be no mental abuse back and forth or emotional abuse or insults going back and forth." And I said, okay. So we go for lunch. And this is when she tells me that she was seeing a therapist for memories that were coming back from her childhood. And through the course of the therapy, they diagnosed her with multiple personality disorder, and she said that they had found 36 different personalities at that point. Multiple personalities is when a person's psyche is fragmented from trauma. It happens in childhood when the abuse and the trauma that they're experiencing is so intense that the child can't process what's happening when their bodies are going through that much pain and their minds are in that much confusion. And it's like taking a fragile mirror or a fragile piece of glass and dropping it. That child's psyche snaps. And so the experience, the memory of the trauma is held in one of those fragments. The other fragment carries on as if it never happened. In order to cope, in order to survive day to day, they have to put a barrier. The mind puts a barrier. And the person who continues on day to day doesn't recall, doesn't remember the trauma experience. It was my grandfather who was committing crimes against my mom and against her siblings. The abuses were deep. They weren't run-of-the-mill spankings or yelling matches or being screamed at. We're talking trauma and torture at levels that even adults would struggle to be able to understand and cope with and survive with afterwards. She remembers being by her father, by men that he knew in the military that had formed this cult group after they came back from the war. These men would get together, hang out in basements, in garages like mechanic shops, in military base locations, Mawada armories in Calgary. And it wasn't just my mom and her siblings being tortured and abused, it was these other men's children as well. She remembers being taken into like a lodge type setting, like a moose lodge or an elk's lodge or something like that. And that the men were wearing masks, different types of masks and animal masks. They wanted her to renounce God, to say that God wasn't real, God didn't exist. And she had to say that God wasn't real and God wasn't going to help her. And she had to repeat this over and over again. She said that she was forced to defecate on a Bible, urinate on a Bible. I think that's very ritual. She retold a story of her dad coming home with a box of kittens. She was given a hammer and told to kill those kittens, and she couldn't do it. She refused to do it. She just kept dropping the hammer. He put a kitten in her lap and she was told to strangle it, and she couldn't do it. She just shook and she handed the cat over. Well, my grandfather ended up slaughtering the heads off of a few of those kittens in front of her, and then standing behind her, putting the hammer in her hand and taking his hand, putting it over hers, and forcing her to hammer on a kitten in a bag. I think the network is actually huge. With it being in the military, if my grandfather and his group was only one group and they damaged my mom and her siblings, and the other members of the group were damaging their children who also have siblings and they have children. It's huge. It's just absolutely huge. The devastation, the number of families that are affected by this is a lot more than I think people realize. A lot of stuff going on behind closed doors, and people carrying on looking like they are living the white picket fence life. And my dad would bring my brother and I here, especially me, when my mom and dad broke up. Okay, my mom had been cheating on my dad. It was a really horrendous time in the family when her programming was breaking down, and he would, after work, realize what kind of mind state I was in, and we'd come here for dinner or go down into the bird sanctuary and go for walks. He had things that he'd put on the table that he'd want me to move. He was testing my telekinetic abilities and his own telekinetic abilities sitting at tables in this diner.